And hello, everyone. Welcome to Interfaithing, Why Families Can Embrace Two Faiths Under One Roof. I am Rabbi Ari, your co-host, otherwise known as the Interfaithing Rabbi, here joined by my amazing co-host, Reverend Anna.
My gosh, that just sent me for a loop. But yes,
Yes?
it's something I am embracing and might have to unpack in maybe like an independent episode, like why it's a little awkward for me to hear that title. But indeed,
I know. So exciting.
since the summer, newly minted Reverend.
Mm-hmm. So again, we want to welcome everybody to this new iteration of the Interfaithing podcast. If you heard our last episode, we kind of described our new transition into the world of interfaithing, or what it is that we're thinking of doing with this space. So you're going to be seeing a lot of more video from us on our YouTube page, such as youtube.com/interfaithingpod, and as well as on Instagram and on Facebook. And part of the idea is that we want to get the word out more about why families can embrace two faiths under one roof. It also allows us to be able to reflect on our work that we're doing separately. So as I mentioned in the last episode, I'll be starting a podcast very soon entitled The Interfaithing Rabbi, where I discuss much of this, but from a particular Jewish perspective, as well as thinking about the ways in which religions kind of interact together. And if you are interested in becoming a part of this growing interfaithing network, growing interfaithing community, you can join us at patreon.com/interfaithing. Ravana, are you ready for this particular scenario that I wanted to drop with you and get your thoughts on?
I am. I'm so excited for this. I think it's going to be great. But before we dive in, I also just want to remind folks that for the Patreon community in particular, we do have a no payment required option. It simply allows you to subscribe and be a part of the Patreon community and see the different things that will be going on there. So we definitely don't want things like cost or paywalls to be a deterrent for the interfaith curious and other interfaith families. So just a reminder that similar to YouTube and social media engagement, there are lots of different ways to engage with us including on Patreon. And you don't have to make a financial commitment from the very beginning. You can just join us there.
You're always welcome to join us. So, Ravana, here is the scenario that I want to share with you and to kind of get your thoughts on, because I'm also thinking about this more in depth. And it has to do with that great ritual known as a Bar Mitzvah. Bar Mitzvah or Bat Mitzvah, it is a rite of passage within the Jewish community that a child, when they come of age, generally the age of 13, but can be a little bit younger as well, that they are recognized as full members of the Jewish community and therefore participate in a ritual where they are announced, and they announce themselves as members of the Jewish community. That includes offering blessings with the Torah, reading directly from the Torah, leading the service in prayers, and also giving a teaching known as a Devar Torah on something related to their lives, that's related to the Torah portion, or related to the idea of what it means to become a Bar Mitzvah or a Bat Mitzvah. In addition, there are a number of other ways in which folks like to be able to mark that time. There's often social justice or social action projects, often known as a mitzvah project or a chesed project. And this is where they get to help out with the larger community. It could be something as helping out with the food kitchen, doing a collection of clothing, offering their services for like a basketball clinic, helping those in need as a way to say, like, I want to be a part of the solution to making the world a better place, as well as being able to participate fully in a community, being called upon to help make a minyan, make a group of 10 Jewish individuals to recite specific prayers like the mourner's Kaddish, when someone's in mourning, that they can be counted in that minyan. So there's a lot of really big things that happen with a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, and that once you become of that age, then and you have that moment, a lot of people like to celebrate. And so there's often these big time celebrations around that time of year, which turns these moments into really great moments for the family and for their community to celebrate the coming of age of this young person. So obviously that there's sometimes a question around, well, for an interfaith family, how do you celebrate a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah? And that leads me to this particular scenario I want to be able to share. So I've been working with this one family, and the mom is Jewish, and the husband, or the father, I should say, the father is of an Irish-Italian descent. I'm going to focus on the Italian as I think that that's a little bit more central for them for right now. And so let's call them how about the DeLucabergs? The DeLucabergs. Okay.
DeLucabergs.
So we got Mama DeLucaberg and we got Papa DeLucaberg and their son. So,
got it.
And son, called son DeLucaberg. So I started to work with them primarily as a rabbi, wanting him to have a bar mitzvah. And that includes learning how to read Hebrew, learning a little bit more about Jewish history, understanding what Judaism really is all about, in addition to getting prepared for the service itself. And as we started to learn, it became clear, especially from Mama DeLucaberg, that it was not sure if this was something that she was unsure if this was something that they wanted to continue to move forward with, that there were certain kinds of feelings related to, well, why are we doing this? And one of the pieces of that question was the interfaith identity of the couple. In fact, Mama DeLucaberg said, we're interfaith. We don't necessarily do so much with our religions and with our different traditions. So doing something that feels that religious doesn't necessarily feel like us. And so she was kind of struggling with that and turning to me to say kind of what I thought about it. So before I share what I thought, Ravanna, what do you think?
Well, I'm intrigued and fascinated by a family who identifies as an interfaith, couple, and almost having kind of a autopilot sense of, okay, well, our son is reaching a particular age, and so the next step is for X. And as they actually started, it sounds like, planning to go forward with that, then these additional questions came up of, but why are we actually doing this?
Yeah, and a piece of that had to do with the kind of the religious piece, right? That this is like a lot of religious stuff that is not necessarily a part of their lives.
Right. I'm not trying to like impose or infer anything
you can infer whatever you want
about the parents, but I could understand naturally, as if you're somebody who isn't like actively engaged with the religious aspects, as we've mentioned, the rituals and traditions, that some imposter syndrome might come up, that parents from either side of the couple could be asking themselves, does it really matter to me that my child performs this type of ritual if it's not necessarily something that we as the parents are actively doing ourselves? And I just have found it so fascinating over the years, like how many of the interfaithing couples in particular that we've worked with have found themselves asking similar questions when it comes to, well, now my kid is about to do this thing, and I thought it was really important to me for X reason, but now reasons Y, Z, on and on and on are coming to the forefront, and the parents having to deal with that.
It's funny, because when I was speaking to Mama DeLucaberg and Papa DeLucaberg, one of the things that came up is that, during their wedding, they were able to incorporate multiple sets of pieces of their traditions. But that's because I think, in a sense, like wedding or a marriage can be this term, this hefty term that is able to hold both sets of traditions, since both traditions have a marriage element to it. And yet, when it comes to, let's say, a bar mitzvah, that it's really just a Jewish thing. It's not necessarily, you can't really do a bar mitzvah and something else without it feeling like, well, which one is it? And even the question of like, what is that something else leads to, well, what is it that we really are incorporating together? And we have talked in many ways about the role that the non-Jewish partner, so in this case, Papa DeLucaberg, plays within the context of a Jewish world, in which very often, if a child is raised in an interfaith family and they decide to do the Jewish thing, then the non-Jewish partner is being asked to kind of come along for the journey. Sometimes that means that they get very involved. Just had a conversation with someone today who was so involved in their synagogue that they named a part of the synagogue actually after him. Like, he was so invested in it.
Wow.
I know, it's amazing, but you can have scenarios like that.
Absolutely.
And yet in this particular case, it's that Papa DeLucaberg was always supportive, but there's a difference between being supportive versus being deeply engaged. And I think that comes from the question of identity, like one's own identity, right? I am here to support my spouse and my family in this choice that we have made together. But because I don't identify with Judaism, like it's not mine, then how much should I engage? How does that work? Or is it I'm kind of following along? And I think that kind of dynamic is there when we're talking about a specific ritual for one tradition that may be difficult for the partner from the other faith tradition to feel connected with. And by the way, if you are listening and have any thoughts of this, we would love to get your feedback on our Patreon page and also by email. Like, let us know what you're thinking. If this is a scenario that resonates with you, you can email us at interfaithingpod@gmail.com. Your thoughts?
Yeah, they're percolating.
It's either like popping.
Pop, 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 pop. Exactly. I think for some families, it also brings up, and by the way, like this could be true for monofaith families as well. Sometimes these life cycle moments arise and parents find themselves saying, well, we've got to do the thing, partly because they did it. So it's what's familiar. Maybe also because depending on the community that you're living in, there's a lot of it happening around you.
Right. Yeah. Mama DeLucaberg was saying that in talking about the Bar Mitzvah with family members, that it was, asking people to come in for this event, to have it as a Bar Mitzvah, right? They're like, okay, I get it. Like, this is an important moment. But if you call it something else, or if you want to be a Bar Mitzvah-like, but it's not the same thing because it doesn't feel like it should be for whatever the reason, people might have a difficult time wrapping their head around it, because that term Bar Mitzvah, Bat Mitzvah, has some heft in that regard.
Absolutely, it does. And I think it's also interesting to pose the question, what does the kid think? Because I think keep using the term monofaith today, whatever.
Not getting mono, not the sickness mono, but the monofaith.
Just as in like one, singular. Kids can sometimes feel kind of dragged along, kicking and screaming. They don't necessarily want to do some parts of the ritual. They just want to get to the party, or they don't want to do it at all. I mean, kids, first of all, working with kids at that age can be an adventure in and of itself.
For sure. And they also want to say no. And I will say, both as a rabbi and as a parent, I find nothing wrong with parents dragging their kids to get through something, because that's part of it, right? The idea of being a part of a tradition is that this is what we're passing down to you. This is something that's an important value to us. There's a Jewish tradition that someone has 3 names: the name that you're given, the name that you make for yourself, and the name that others give to you. And this is in many ways about the name that parents give to their kids as they transition into making the name that works for them. There's a sense of, this is something that's important for us to bring you to this moment. And that's our responsibility as parents and also as faith leaders. But it definitely changes when if you have from the monofaith, as you're mentioning it, right? Both parents went through it, or both parents have an understanding of it, like this is part from us. In an interfaith context, you don't have that. And it can sometimes feel lonely. It can sometimes feel like you're the only one responsible for bringing them there. or that, your partner doesn't have that same experience. And so the question of, is this something that we have to do?
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a little bit harder.
It does. And I think it's really important in this conversation to remind folks or even clarify this is a life cycle moment, but it's not an end point.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it is a commencing of the next era of a young person's life. It's a
Right.
starting point.
Right.
And so even if parents are grappling with the question of, am I doing something? Am I forcing something on my child? And also for an interfaithing couple, potentially doing something that's disrespectful to that's a lot to grapple with. And I absolutely understand that. But your child is going to continue to grow and mature, and they're also going to reach
Mm-hmm.
other stages of their life where they continue to make informed decisions on their own.
Right.
So going ahead with something that makes sense to you as a family now is okay because you're not determining the entire future.
And in fact, this is, I think, also important point to mention that the bar mitzvah or a bar mitzvah or Bat Mitzvah, or sometimes called a B mitzvah, or some actually call it a Brit mitzvah, meaning there's a whole issue with how to call this particular moment in time. But however it's called, that a child doesn't receive a bar mitzvah. Like if someone doesn't have a ceremony, they are actually still a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah because it's about a moment in time that occurs anyway, the beginning of your body changing. That's why it happens at 12 and a half or 13 years of age as the body starts to change and go through puberty. It's that kind of a ritual of marking that moment. And so, for instance, if you did not have the ceremony, the ritual that is called Bat Mitzvah, and yet you found yourself in a Jewish community when you're 20 years old and you identify as Jewish, that you can count in a minyan. You can be counted as being a Jewish adult, even if you did not have the ritual itself. No one is checking that. It's because it's about the fact that this is what's happening. So it's about really acknowledging that moment in some kind of meaningful sort of way, to the point that you're saying, right? You're not necessarily forcing it upon them in a negative way. It's saying like, this is us commencing this period of time for you, or this new moment in your life. And we believe it's important to do it in this way, but it's not like this is the end all and be all.
Exactly. And for interfacing families, I mean, there are ways that you can incorporate both traditions. I've done that. I've played that role. In fact, this was, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to put numbers to it because I think it's more, I think it's more years than I would even state. I was over 10 years ago, or about 10 years ago, I was asked to play a role and participate in a family from the interfaith community that I was still teaching with at that time.
The Interfaith community of New York.
Yes, the Interfaith community of New York, which was the organization where Ari and I met.
IFC, baby.
What? Also, special shout out to New York today. It's November 5th. You either know or you don't. It's fine. But special shout out to New York. So approximately 10 years ago, I was asked by one of those families to participate and kind of play the Christian representative role.
Okay.
They actually reached out to both my co-teacher at that time and myself, and my co-teacher didn't feel comfortable with it. And, the family was totally understanding. Like, that's how they approached and framed the initial conversation to each of us.
Do you know why they weren't, your co-teacher was not comfortable with it?
Essentially, the family had already done some planning. And so they were kind of coming to us, not at the beginning, but closer toward the end.
Got it.
And so certain decisions had already been made.
Right. Important point to families. Get these folks before these things start, or towards the beginning.
Yeah. And so again, this is, like 10 years of history. I am really trying hard not to misrepresent what occurred, but we weren't being brought in from the very beginning. And so because of some of the other decisions that were being made, and I think a little bit even like the language that the family was using to describe the event and what they were asking each of us to do and what that would mean.
Yeah.
My Jewish co-teacher at that time ultimately just said, I'm not comfortable with it.
So I wanna keep going on the story because it's so important and relevant. And I want to pause for a second because you talked about that the name that was given or the name that was chosen for it. Because in a certain sense, that's also the situation that I'm facing with. Because what ended up happening was when the Mama DeLucaberg decided, I'm not sure. And then I brought up the idea of, well, it feels to me like this should be something that's more incorporated with not just the Jewish but also tradition, but also Papa DeLucaberg's tradition. And so we started to talk about that. And what's clear is that for Papa DeLucaberg, although he was raised in Catholicism, he was an altar boy, Catholicism is not something that for him really speaks to him anymore. So the question of then, well, what is that thing? Like, what is the inheritance piece that he would have that buy-in for, that he's also being able to pass along? That is part of where we are right now. And an element of that is also, what is this thing called? Because if it's not necessarily going to be something that is Jewish and Catholic, then it's Jewish and what? Or if it's a bar mitzvah, if it's not a bar mitzvah and confirmation, it's a bar mitzvah and what is there? So that's kind of where we're at. So I'm also very curious to hear about the name that was chosen. So that's why I wanted to pause there.
Yeah. And it is a really important point. And again, as memory serves me, um, I think that the family was also in a state of kind of trying not to only refer to it as a bar mitzvah in order to be respectful to the also Catholic, in this case, side of the family. But essentially, that is what they were planning. And more often than not, I think they were referring to it as a bar mitzvah. And because there were also certain elements that were not going to take place, I think is especially where my Jewish co-teacher was like, but you kind of are calling it a thing, but then you're not including really important parts.
Like, well, like
and
the
that
core,
was coming from,
right, the core pieces to what a bar mitzvah.
right, like it wasn't taking place in a temple. And so there were certain portions of the ceremony that weren't being included. And that was a part of, again, decisions that the family had already made of like what they wanted this whole event for their son to look like. And it ultimately led to, my Jewish co-teacher at the time just not feeling personally comfortable enough to go or participate. They found somebody in their local community who did. I'm not remembering if this person was a rabbi or if they had a different title.
Right.
But they primarily
that role.
presided over the ceremonial parts. And so there were like readings of blessings. And then essentially I got up and like offered a prayer from representing the Christian side. I'm also fairly certain that I was careful not to say the word Jesus.
Right, because of the fact that...
Or to say it too much, because at that time I was very much like, I think the audience is going to be much more leaning on one side than the other.
Right. Well, there's also the piece of, if you call it a bar mitzvah, right, then there is an expectation of what is going to be included and what is not going to be included. And especially if you're thinking about trying to make that balance among the different faith traditions, that the name Jesus at a bar mitzvah is, I think, an even more difficult thing to grapple with than, let's say, saying Jesus under the chuppah as part of a interfaith wedding ceremony. Yeah. And that's already difficult for some folks, for some Jewish folks to deal with. So I can understand that concern that you were feeling about kind of using the name of Jesus in that ceremony. So it sounds like it was referred to as a bar mitzvah. And do you think that part of the reason why that name was so important is because what? Like, what was so significant about making sure that it was really just called that?
I do think there was an element of so many other families in the community that they lived in at the time, like were also Jewish. And so therefore that's what the event of many of the other, especially like classmates and friends of this particular kid, like that's what they were doing, was it was also very clear, like, this is not just a birthday party either.
Yeah.
We want to still do what 13-year-olds in the community like are going to do, and there are a lot of people in the community who either identify as Jewish or identify as Catholic, and I think the family was already clear that having, let's say, more or stronger Catholic elements was not where they were leaning.
So they wanted to give some space for the Catholic side, some recognition of that kind of unity, but much more leaning in the direction of Bar Mitzvah.
Yeah. I mean, even the fact
Yeah.
that they asked me to do it because they knew, like, I'm not Catholic, and they
Right.
knew that. So it was more so, let's just make sure that, the Catholic slash like Christian parent more broadly, that there is a recognition that we are an interfaith family, and we're not saying just because we're having this event for our son that has mostly Jewish elements to it, but that doesn't mean that we're suddenly like choosing to only be a Jewish family, or that our son is even saying that he is identifying singularly as Jewish. Like, my memory also of the child, because I mean, he was in my class, I worked with him. I think he was trying to grapple with, like, what does it mean for me to be interfaith?
And I remember when we were teaching together for that same age group, that one of the things that we were emphasizing with the kids is that just because other people may think that you have to choose, you don't have to choose. That you can be able to identify as both. You can be able to call yourself as you would want to be called, whether that was Jewish and Christian or interfaith, or decide, yes, I would prefer to be called Jewish. I prefer to be called Christian. Those options are there for you. And so I guess what I'm hearing in the story that you're sharing is that it wasn't like the ceremony itself was not being viewed as a real shared event. Like, it's not a 50-50 kind of a thing. And we've also talked about that a lot, right, in previous seasons, that there's no right permutation of what interfaithing is about, but it's about trying to incorporate the faith traditions and the cultural traditions together. So part of that point, I think it makes me feel more clear about, like in the case of the DeLucabergs, the need for Bar Mitzvah to be a significant, like the main call for the name, because it's clear that that is where this is all coming from. But I also think that it's about what are the expectations of what this ceremony actually is, or what this event actually is. And I think that that's also where the name comes in. So I'll tell you where we've landed thus far. And again, part of it is also because of the fact that Papa DeLucaberg does not really identify with his Catholicism in such a way whereby bringing that in is something that would be consistent with the way in which he's lived his life. However, his Irish Italian heritage, I think, would be. And that's sort of where he's in the process of thinking and working on it. And he and Mama DeLucaberg are talking with themselves, think about it with each other, and also with son DeLucaberg. And I'm going to be coming back and learning more. And I'm happy to update everybody with where they are coming from. But where I'm focusing now on is what to call it. And I struggled with the idea of calling it a bar mitzvah because of the fact that a bar mitzvah means something so particular. Just as and maybe this is also where your co-teacher was struggling with it. When it comes to bar mitzvah, or what the ceremony is, really what it in the Talmud, and in particular in the ways that Jews have thought about this ritual for centuries, is that when a child, and originally it was just male children, but eventually women were included, when a child becomes of the age that they could be counted, they were given the first opportunity to be counted in a minyan by virtue of reading a passage from the Torah. So it has to have a Torah. You have to recite the blessings before and after the Torah reading, and to read directly from the Torah, which is why learning Hebrew is important. That's why having a Torah present is important. Often that's why people would want it to be with a sanctuary or in a synagogue, so there could be a Torah. By the way, there are many folks who do B'nai Mitzvah. That's a plural of Bar Mitzvah, B'nai Mitzvah. There are plenty of folks who tutor B'nai Mitzvah kids and run services for them outside the realm of a synagogue. There are a variety of different reasons for that. But
Right.
many of those have a Torah. You just bring a Torah with you and you're able to engage in a ceremony around that. And that idea of sort of accepting, of reading from the Torah, of accepting the blessing, of reading the blessings with the Torah is an acknowledgement that the Torah is a guide for you, that you accept the obligations as a Jew that's within the context of what is in Torah. So I could understand why, for anyone who has been asked sort of at the end of the day to participate in a ceremony that doesn't include a Torah, that doesn't include that kind of, at least that mini ritual, that it doesn't feel like the heft of what a bar mitzvah actually is supposed to feel like. In addition, the Torah being taken out as part of a service, that is a uniquely Jewish experience, and what I have not yet experienced in my work with interfaith families, and I'm curious to see sort of how this percolates and percolating, I like that term, as you shared it before, over the course of my career with this work, is to what extent would I be comfortable as a rabbi to bring a Torah into a ceremony that is also incorporating like real powerful elements of another faith tradition. Like a wedding that I've done, weddings that I've done don't have a Torah there. It has the chuppah, but a chuppah could also be a way of sort of creating a space wherever you may find yourself to be. And the actual tent itself is not inherently sacred. It's about what the tent really means. The Torah is a much different kind of a deal. So using the Torah is like important for the bar mitzvah, but I'm also thinking that it makes it harder to really bring in another tradition at the same time. You know what I'm kind of also thinking about that? Other thoughts on that, but I've spoken for too long. So Ravana, you're up.
No, it's all fine. And again, like I wanted to bring this example because it's directly relevant to the question that you're asking and the work that you're doing with this family. And I was looking through my files and looking through my stuff, and like I couldn't find the order of service.
Right.
And I just want to hold that as a big caveat because again, I don't remember everything that actually took place. It's entirely possible that the venue, like it was definitely an event venue, and we moved to different areas of the venue.
Yeah.
And one of them gave me the vibe kind of like a chapel space, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's where the first portion of the event, which would have been anything that we're going to refer to as kind of the ritualized part of the service. And then the other parts of the venue were more for, like the cocktail hour and reception and then the dance hall for the kids and on and on. And I also don't remember if it was the name of the venue itself, if it was attached to a synagogue. I said temple before. I apologize.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was
okay.
attached to a synagogue in their local community or if it was just an independent venue. And they happened to do a lot of bar and bat mitzvahs there because the community had a high population of Jewish families. So I don't want to say that there was no Torah portion at all in the service. It's entirely possible that, the child who was doing this, like, had a couple of Hebrew lessons because he was at least going to recite like one blessing. But something about the decision-making process and what the order of service ultimately included made my co-teacher at the time ultimately like uncomfortable enough that they weren't willing to participate. And I don't even know, here I am 10 or so years later, I don't know that if I were approached the same way that I would have said yes without a little bit more investment. I think at the time, I honestly did it a little bit more because I didn't have a title, right? Like not ordained. And so I was sort of like, I'm happy to play this role for this family because I've worked with them and I knew their kids for X number of years at that point. And so personally, my decision to do it was I knew that I wasn't really taking on the mantle of like must represent Christianity in a particular way. It was a little bit more from the vein of let me do this to say I had the experience and see how it feels and do this nice thing for this family I care about because they really wanted to include something of the Christian portion of their family in some way. And I don't really think they knew how else to do it.
Right. And I think that that is part of where this is coming from, is that there are, and this also, I think, behooves us and behooves me to look at some materials that have been used by other interfaithing families, by other interfaith communities, in terms of what they have done for these kind of ceremonies and scenarios, because I'm sure that there are a lot of different options out there. However, very few interfaith families who are looking for this kind of combo, this kind of bringing in of different traditions, but also that there's not like a set kind of equal manner, right? That we want them to be like a family who says, like, we want to share some of our traditions, but we don't necessarily know like what that means or what that looks like. And there aren't as many resources that are easily accessible. There aren't as many interfaith communities that are right around the corner that have been training folks for a long period of time. And part of our hope is that a podcast like this and the work that other faith-based, interfaith-based communities out there can be able to start to really raise the profile of the need to provide resources, some of which is already out there, that can be helpful for folks and helpful for families. But that doesn't come from a place of saying, all right, well, it has to be equal. I think that that's the element here, because part of what's the challenge, especially in thinking about how to serve the needs of the DeLucabergs here, who are coming at the beginning of the process, number one is that there isn't a community that they're attached to that is sort of driving this need, or that they're responding to what's happening in the rest of their community. It's about what they want for son DeLucaberg and what the son wants, but also that the religious element of the Jewish tradition is kind of what's primary here. Because to identify as Jewish, or I'll put it another way, that Jewish means a lot more than just a religion. Jewish is an ethnicity, Jewish is a culture, Jewish is a way of life. Jewish is a connection to a country, to the state of Israel, to the land of Israel. And that the religious piece to it, though, is often how other folks identify it. Like Judaism is a religion. If you're Jewish, I guess that's what your religion may be. But at the core, the religious piece of Judaism is the way in which the culture, the ethnicity, the group identity manifests itself in ritual form, in coming together in a communal sense, that the religion and the people are inherently tied together in a unique way. For Papa DeLucaberg, Catholicism as a religion is separate from his identity as Irish Italian, and that you could be part of feel a very strong connection to your Irish or Italian roots. That's part of your culture. That's your identity. And yes, you may be Catholic, but the Catholicism isn't necessarily inherent in one's own practice of Irish or Italian heritage. And the best example of that, I think, is that you have plenty of folks who don't believe in God who are Jewish, like people who are Jewish who don't believe in God, who don't do anything about the religion, but that when they still want to have a bar mitzvah because they want to pass along their Jewish legacy, and they still do it as a religious ritual, but it's not about the religion, it's about the other Jewish pieces to it.
Yeah.
And so in thinking about taking this next step, it's feeling that the bar mitzvah it needs to be primary, but that something else needs to be mentioned, especially from the very beginning, from the title, that indicates that this is something more than just the bar mitzvah. This is not what you would see if you just went to a bar mitzvah. So it's like a bar mitzvah right? That's where I'm leaving it for right now. It's a bar mitzvah but I don't know what that is following with the and that's kind of where I'm trying to kind of help figure that out and help the DeLucabergs figure that out for them as well.
Well, maybe that's where our listeners can also help out. I mean, send us your suggestions, right? Like
right. The bar mitzvah
if you've had bar mitzvah
for Irish Italian heritage, but not the Catholic heritage. We're not the Catholic, not the religious piece to it.
Right. Yeah, because I think most people probably would feel like something terminology of like coming of age is either too generic or also
Right.
doesn't
It doesn't
say what you intend.
And it doesn't have that heft, right?
No,
Like, I'm
it
going to
doesn't.
fly across the country for a coming of age. Really?
To
Mm.
each their own. I think that that gets into more of like the interrelational dynamics of like family
Fair
and dear
point.
friends
It's a fair point.
of like, what am I willing to fly across the country? And I get it. Like, I do understand.
Right.
I do understand, but
But right. So, but the point is that there are other ways of framing it
Mhm.
that, and the question is, what is like? It's definitely clear that the bar mitzvah is a part of it. Is perhaps the first thing that's said, right? That's the first thing that's happening. But it's also the and that the and is just as significant, even if it's not equal. It's still as significant, and perhaps that's also why, because the family you're talking about, they asked you to participate in it. They wanted somebody who had some heft for them, his teacher, who is versed in the Christian tradition, to be there and to be able to share on behalf of that side of our family something that is important. It's not going to be the central element to the experience, but it is still important. And I think that idea of significance and importance, but not necessarily of equal weight, right? It's kind of what I talk about with my kids in terms of, things need to be fair, but fair is not necessarily equal.
Exactly. Yeah. Fairness and equity. Well, and even equality and equity are not the same thing. So I love that. Yeah, that's something you're imparting to the young ones, because
Trying
it's a
to
really
at least see that there's some good days and bad days with that.
what, and in parenting,
Right.
yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, but I mean, we could potentially put together like a whole sidebar lesson just on that. That's an incredible thing that even adults, I mean, maybe even interfaithing couples themselves, that can be a helpful frame of how you think about these things, is like things you as a couple and as a family can decide like what is fair and what works for you. And it doesn't mean that things are going to be equal. And it also doesn't mean that what works for your family will work for another family.
Right. Right. That's the thing. There's not one size fits all. And trying to meet families where they are, I think, is something that is very difficult to do and yet is so critical, especially for interfaithing folks who are trying to figure it out and don't really know, because they don't know yet. And we don't necessarily know. So there isn't really that one size, but to use all of our resources to help them out. So
Absolutely.
at the very least, this has helped with my own thinking. So, Ravana, I appreciate the opportunity to pick your brain on this. We'll obviously update all of our listeners on what the next steps are with the DeLucabergs. If you have suggestions about what is the Bar Mitzvah and what it should be called, would love to get your thoughts on it. If you have similar stories, would love to get your stories on this. Again, please feel free to email us at interfaithingpod@gmail.com or join us on our Patreon page, share in the comments wherever you see this podcast or hear this podcast. And I'm looking forward to continuing to share more of this work with you as we move forward. So with that, take care.
Stay curious
And keep
and keep
interfaithing.